This morning, my wife Loretta and I were having a conversation, and she was telling me about what was a very inspiring story. And I won't repeat the story, it would take too long to do that. But it was a story about somebody that a lot of you have heard of or are familiar with, Chip Gaines, and his running in a marathon. And this was something she saw and had shared. And it was inspiring. It was inspiring not only because he ran in a marathon, even though when he first came up with the idea, this was something that seemed very impossible for him to do. And it was inspiring because he did it, and when he gets to that point where he felt like quitting, he kept going. But also there were other aspects of the people involved in this and how their help, and it became very touching. But again, I'm not going to try to get into the detail of it. It was inspiring, and I think all of us know some story about somebody in sports or something else where they felt like giving up, they felt like quitting, and they pushed through that. They pushed past it. And not only do we all, I think, know some stories like that in the world of sports, but we probably all have some story for our own lives where there was some time where you felt like quitting. You felt like stopping what you were doing, whether that was something as, in one sense, not as personally important as a race, or something in life where you were in a very difficult situation. You were pushing through with a business or a family situation or something else where it just seemed like the odds were too great. Life is tough. Life is tough. And life is filled not necessarily with moments where you felt like quitting always, but life's filled with hard times. Times where it seems like what you're up against may be bigger than you. Well, you're not alone. Not only if you look around the room do you find that to be the case, but there's a verse in the Word of God that says, "There's no temptation that's taken you, but such as is common to man." Everything that we face, other people face. Everything that you face, in some form, Jesus Christ faced and overcame. And the Bible is filled with stories of men, great men of God, who faced tough times, who faced overwhelming odds, and men who even at times felt like quitting, who felt like this was too big for them. Tonight we're going to look at one story about one such man. The man is Gideon. And you can take your Bibles and turn to Judges chapter 6. Judges chapter 6, verse 1. "And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of Midian 7 years. And the hand of Midian prevailed against Israel. And because of the Midianites, the children of Israel made them the dens which are in the mountains, and caves, and strongholds." Things were tough for Israel. They were being opposed by this nation of people, the Midianites. And it got so bad that these guys literally had to take to the hills. They had to take to the hills. They had to hide out at times in caves. They made these little dens in the mountains, in the caves. And this happened because Israel had turned away from the Lord. You know, the book of Judges, it's right on the heels of the book of Joshua. Joshua had led Israel into the promised land. And right before he dies, at the very end of the book of Joshua, which precedes the book of Judges, he calls all of Israel together. And he says to them, you know, you've got this wonderful land now, these cities you've claimed. You've got these great houses. You've got these fields that you didn't plant, and so on and so forth. And again, he tells them, like he had told them before, and like Moses had told them time and again, all of this is yours, but you have to stand faithful. You have to keep your heart with the Lord. And if you turn away from the Lord, then the Lord's not going to be able to help you. The Lord will turn away from you if you turn away from him, because there's nothing he can do for you. And they all said at that time, we understand, we get it. We would never do that. We would never do that. We're going to stand. And then you start reading the book of Judges and you say, holy smokes. It didn't take any time at all when they completely walked away from God. Judges is almost comical when you read it, because here they are, they're doing great, walking with God. They turn away and their life just goes down the toilet. And then they get tired of that. They get tired of getting beat up. They get tired of being miserable. And they call on God, and God sends a judge. And that judge leads them back to God, and he causes them to be, delivered from the enemy. And then, as soon as that judge dies off, they go right back away from God, and they repeat this whole thing. And it just goes over and over again like a broken record. Judges, by the way, the judges are, that role and the meaning of that title in the book of Judges and at that time period is something much greater than what that word means today in the title, that role, what it usually is today. It's not, a judge back at that time was more than just someone who made judgments or pronounced justice in certain situations. At times they're also called deliverers or saviors. And their responsibility and their role was much more like a governor or provincial governor than it was just a judge or a guy that sits behind that bench and bangs a gavel. And such a man was Gideon that we're going to learn about. Verse 3. And it was so when Israel had sown that the Midianites came up, and the Amalekites, and the children of the east, even they came up against them. They're really getting ganged up on. And they encamped against them, and destroyed the increase of the earth, till thou come unto Gaza, and left no sustenance for Israel, neither sheep, nor ox, nor ass. For they came up with their cattle in their tents, and they came as grasshoppers for multitude. For both they and their camels were without number, and they entered into the land to destroy it. They just are starving these guys out. They're taking all of their food. They're taking all of their livestock. They're taking everything that they have. They come up against them, and they are an enemy that cannot be numbered. They are like the grasshoppers in the field. There are just countless. Verse 6, and Israel was greatly impoverished because of the Midianites, and the children of Israel cried unto the Lord. They cried unto God, and that's a good thing that they did. They got tired of the situation, and they were smart enough, they were wise enough to turn their hearts to God and ask for help. And it came to pass, verse 7, when the children of Israel cried unto the Lord because of the Midianites, that the Lord said, nope, you got yourself in this mess. No. I'm done with you. Too bad. No. Could have. He could have. But God never gives up on his people. God never gives up on you. God never gives up on you. And God didn't give up on them. They walked away from him again and again and again, but every time they turned their hearts back to him, God was always there for them. It didn't matter what they had done. He was always there for them. Verse 8. And the Lord sent a prophet unto the children of Israel, which said unto them, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, I brought you up from Egypt, and brought you forth out of the house of bondage. And I delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians, and out of the hand of all that oppressed you, and drave them out before you, and gave you their land. And I said unto you, I am the Lord your God. Fear not the gods of the Amorites, in whose land ye dwell. But ye have not obeyed my voice. This is how you got into the mess, he's telling them. This is what's happened. You know, this is why you're in this predicament. And he's not telling them that to rub their nose in it. He's telling them that so they can recognize that was the wrong path. You need to get back on the right one. Verse 11. And there came an angel of the Lord, and sat under an oak, which was in Ophrah, that pertained unto Joash the Abizarite. And his son Gideon threshed wheat by the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. So here's this man named Joash, and he's got a son named Gideon. And Gideon, you know, when nobody's looking, he's threshing wheat in the wine press so nobody could see what he was doing, and they wouldn't just come and steal the food. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him and said unto him, The Lord is with thee, thou mighty man of valor. Wow. You know, there's more than one great statement in there, isn't there? You know, first of all, the Lord is with you. That's great news. And then to be called a mighty man of valor. You know, that's quite a praise. That's quite a compliment. And Gideon said unto him, Oh, my Lord, if the Lord be with us, why then is all this befallen us? Gideon couldn't see past, the situation. He said, if the Lord's with us, then why are we in such trouble? Why is all this stuff happening if the Lord's with us? And it's not that he's blaming the Lord. Gideon knows the score. He knows that they brought it on themselves. But he also knows that God had told them that if you turn away from me, then I'm not there for you. So he's saying, hey, the Lord's not with us. We turned away from him. So this is why we're in this situation. We don't have the Lord with us, and that's why we're in trouble. And where be all his miracles which our father told us of, saying, Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord hath forsaken us and delivered us into the hands of the Midianites. Saying, where are all the miracles? And boy, how many people today that don't really know God, that don't really walk with him, feel that way? Where's all the miracles? Where's the power of God? You read about it in the Bible, people talk about it, but where is it? Why aren't I seeing it? Well, that's what Gideon was saying. He said that God wasn't with them because they weren't seeing the power of God. Verse 14. And the Lord looked upon him and said, Go in this thy might, and thou shalt save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have not I sent thee? Again, just what incredible news that Gideon's receiving. God's telling him, hey, I'm with you. Go and deliver Israel from the hand of the Midianites. I'm sending you to do this job. Verse 15. And he, Gideon, said unto him, O my Lord, wherewith shall I save Israel? Behold, my family is poor in Manasseh, and I'm the least in my father's house. Who am I? Who am I? And boy, anybody that's not arrogant, when God calls them and says, I've got this great job for you, that's how I think anybody that's not arrogant would feel. Who am I? I'm not big enough for this. I'm not great enough for that. I'm not anybody important. That's how Gideon felt. He said, my father's house, we're not some leading family in Israel. We're not like some great plantation holders. We're not people of great means. We're just some poor family. And that's bad enough, but I'm the least in my father's house. I'm the lowest of the low. Verse 16, and the Lord said unto him, surely I will be with thee, and thou shalt smite the Midianites as one man. God said, you don't have to do it alone. You don't have to do it alone. I am with you. That makes all the difference, doesn't it? Yes. None of us are big enough not only to lead God's people, but to do so much that we're faced with. So many times in life, what we're dealing with seems to be just bigger than us. How do I get out of this situation? How do I overcome that? How do I see through this? How am I successful in that? And if you think about it just on your own means, your own limited abilities, then yeah, you have good reason to feel like you might not be up to the task. But God is with you. Just like God was with Gideon. He said, I am with you. I am with you. And that makes all the difference. Verse 17, and he, Gideon, said unto him, if now I have found grace in thy sight, then show me a sign that thou talkest with me. Gideon's one. What's the state? What's the show me state? Missouri. There you go. Missouri. It's called the Show Me State. Well, Gideon must have been originally from Missouri because he's always saying, show me, prove it, prove it. I want a sign, okay? I'm not going to go out there and try this without proof. And God is so gracious, okay? Never mind that this is an angel talking to him. I mean, that in itself should be some indicator. But he wants a sign. So he says, look, I want a sign, and Gideon comes up with this plan. He says, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a little sacrifice. He says, you wait right here, says the angel. You wait right here while I get this ready. I'm going to go make a sacrifice, and I'm going to get a kid. I'm going to kill it. I'm going to get all the trimmings to go with it. I'm going to lay it all out on this altar, and then you do something. So the angel says, okay. He gets it all laid out, and the angel has fire shoot up out of the rock and burn up the whole thing. And you would think, well, boy, that would do it for me, but Gideon's still not convinced. We'll skip down. Verse 25. And it came to pass the same night that the Lord said unto him, take thy father's young bullock, even the second bullock of 7 years old, and throw down the altar of Baal that thy father hath. Who has? His father. His father, yeah. Not only is his family poor, but his family has an altar unto Baal. He doesn't have anybody really standing with him, does he? He doesn't have anybody really to say, well, I'm not in this by myself as far as people go. His own family was worshiping Baal. And God says, throw down that altar and cut down the grove that is by it. Verse 26, and build an altar unto the Lord thy God upon the top of this rock in the ordered place, and take the second bullock and offer a burnt sacrifice with the wood of the grove that thou shalt cut down. Then Gideon took 10 men of his servants, and did as the Lord had said unto him. And so it was, because he feared his father's household. He feared his father's household and the men of the city, that he could not do it by day, that he did it by night. Wow. He does what God says. He tears down the altar, but he's afraid of his own father's household and the men of his own city, that he has to do it when nobody's looking and just with 10 guys that he could really trust. And when the city, verse 28, rose early in the morning, behold, the altar of Baal was cast down, and the grove was cut down that was by it, and the second bullock was offered upon the altar that was built. And they said one to another, Who hath done this thing? Who had the nerve to tear down the altar of Baal? And when they inquired and asked, they said, Gideon, the son of Joash, hath done this thing. Somebody told on him. Then, verse 30, the men of the city said unto Joash, unto Gideon's father, Bring out thy son, that he may die, because he hath cast down the altar of Baal, and because he hath cut down the grove that was by it. They want to kill him. They tell Joash, bring out your son, we're going to kill him for doing this. Boy. And Joash said unto all that stood against him, Will you plead for Baal? Will you save him? He that will plead for him, let him be put to death while it is yet morning. If he be a god, let him plead for himself, because one hath cast down his altar. He might have put up that altar, but he wasn't ready to turn over his son to be killed for tearing it down. And he said, what? If Baal's a god, well, then he doesn't need you to plead his case. He doesn't need you to fight for him. If Baal is a god, let him fight for himself. Let him take care of the situation. Verse 32. Therefore on that day, Joash, called him his son, Gideon, Jerubbaal, saying, Let Baal plead against him, because he hath thrown down his altar. Skip down to verse 36. And Gideon said unto God, If thou wilt save Israel by my hand, as thou hast said, okay, we did the altar thing. That worked out okay for me. But if I'm going to try to go beyond this and really lead guys up against the Midianites, that whole big army that can't be numbered, behold, I want some more proof. I will put a fleece of wool in the floor. And if the dew be on the fleece only, and it be dry upon all the earth beside, then I shall know, then shall I know that thou wilt save Israel by my hand, as thou hast said. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a fleece, take a nice wool rug and lay it down. And in the morning, I want all the ground around it to be dry, but that fleece to be wet from the dew. Okay? That'll be a proof to me. Verse 38, And it was so, for he rose up early on the morrow, and thrust the fleece together, and wringed the dew out of the fleece, a bowl full of water. There he is. He picks it up, and he wrings out a whole bowl full of water from this. And he says, well, now I'm convinced. And if you know the story, you know that's not true. Verse 39. And Gideon said unto God, Let not thine anger be hot against me, and I will speak but this once. Don't get mad, God, but I just want to, push this one more time here. Let me prove, I pray thee, but this once with the fleece. Let it now be dry upon the fleece, and upon all the ground let there be dew. So he gets to thinking, maybe the ground dried out quicker than that fleece. Maybe I should have done this the other way around. Let's try it that way, so that the fleece is dry, but all the ground around it's wet. Verse 40, And God did so that night, for it was dry upon the fleece only, and there was dew on all the ground. Boy, God is so gracious, and, don't you go trying this where you put out your rug and tell God you want this sign or that sign. Jesus Christ said it's an evil and adulterous generation that seeketh after a sign. Signs are to confirm. It's not to look for guidance. It's to confirm what God's already what He's already told you. But He was very gracious here with Gideon, doing all this stuff, to get Gideon to the point of knowing that God was with him as he was going to go into this battle. Well, let's read about it. Judges chapter 7. Then Jerubbaal, who is Gideon, and all the people who were with him rose up early and pitched beside the well of Harod, so that the host of the Midianites were on the north side of them by the hill of Morah in the valley. And the Lord said unto Gideon,
The people that are with thee are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, saying, Mine own hand hath saved me. Now therefore, go to, proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, Whosoever is fearful and afraid, let him return and depart early from Mount Gilead. And there returned of the people 22,000, and there remained 10,000. So he's got 32,000 men to go up against an enemy that you learn later was 135,000. I think that's what it was. Yeah. And God says, you know what? If you win it with that, even though the odds at this point are 4-1, if you still win it with that number, Israel's going to say, well, it's just because we're so tough. We're such great fighters. So we got to get rid of some folks. So just tell anybody that's going in there that if you're afraid, go home. And he just loses, what, 2/3 of his army? More than that? 32, and he ends up with 10. Right? How many went home?
22,000.
22,000. Yeah, he had 32. 22, so more than 2/3. Which, again, gives you an indication of where these folks are at, that there are that many of them that are afraid. But you know what? God can do more with the 10,000 that aren't afraid than 32,000 that are. It's not in the numbers, it's in the men of believing. Verse 4. And the Lord said unto Gideon, the people are yet too many. Bring them down into the water, and I will try them for thee there. And it shall be that of whom I say unto thee, this shall go with thee, the same shall go with thee. And of whomsoever I say unto thee, this shall not go with thee, the same shall not go. So he brought down the people unto the water, and the Lord said unto Gideon, Everyone that lappeth of the water with his tongue, as a dog lappeth, him shalt thou set by himself. Likewise, everyone that boweth down upon his knees to drink. And the number of them that lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, were 300 men. But all the rest of the people bowed down upon their knees to drink water. And the Lord said unto Gideon, By the 300 men that lapped will I save you, and deliver the Midianites into thine hand, and let all the other people go every man unto his place. So now he's brought them down to the water, and those that bend their knee to get the water, he says, you guys leave. The ones that scoop it up and drink it like that, those are the ones he's keeping, and that gets it down to just 300. 300 against 135,000. That works out to 450 to 1. Those are the odds. 450 to 1. Each one of you guys has to kill 450 guys. You're probably no longer thinking that you can do this by yourself.
No.
Where did I leave off?
Verse 6, now into 7.
Okay. And God said unto Gideon, By the 300 men that lapped will I save you, and deliver the Midianites into thine hand, and let all the other people go every man unto his place. Verse 8. So the people took victuals in their hand, and their trumpets, and he set all the rest of Israel, every man unto his tent, and retained those 300 men, and the host of Midian was beneath him in the valley. And it came to pass the same night that the Lord said unto him, Arise, get thee down into the host, for I have delivered it into thine hand. But if thou fear to go down, go thou with Phurah thy servant down to the host, and thou shalt hear what they say, and afterward shall thine hands be strengthened to go down into the host. Said you can go down and fight and win. But if you're still not convinced, if you still need more encouragement, then you take that fella and go down
And you're going to hear something that's going to encourage you that you truly will win.
Then he went down with Phur his servant unto the outside of the armed men that were in the host. Verse 12. And the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the children of the east lay along in the valley like grasshoppers for multitude. And their camels were without number, as by the sand by the seaside for multitude. And when Gideon was come, behold, there was a man that told a dream unto his fellow, and said, Behold, I dreamed a dream. And lo, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the host of Midian, and came unto a tent, and smote it that it fell, and overturned it that the tent lay along. Now that was his dream. And this fella comes up with an understanding of this dream that I'm not quite sure how he got that from that dream. But what he says to him, verse 14, and his fellow answered and said, This is nothing else save the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. For into his hand hath God delivered Midian and all his host.
Now, you know, there's those things in the Word of God that I'm not quite sure how God accomplished that one. If he just knew that this guy was going to have this dream, this other fellow was going to come up with this idea about it, but God knew that that was going to be it, and he sends Gideon and his servant to go hear it.
Verse 15. And it was so, when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and the interpretation thereof, that he worshipped and returned into the host of Israel and said, Arise, for the Lord hath delivered into your hand the host of Midian.
Now he's finally gotten to the place that he knows that he knows that he knows. And sometimes it takes a while to get to the place where you are convinced that God is with you, and that's okay. Sometimes it takes a while. It took Abraham a while to get convinced of the promise, didn't it? You know, a lot of times it takes people a while to rise up, and it takes some convincing to get to the place where they know that God will do what he promised. But what's important is that you get there. Not that it might take you some time, but that you get there. And now Gideon, he's at that place. He's got there.
Verse 16. And he divided the 300 men into 3 companies. And he put a trumpet in every man's hand, with empty pitchers, and lamps within the pitchers. And he said unto them, Look on me, and do likewise. And behold, when I come to the outside of the camp, it shall be that as I do, so shall ye do. When I blow with the trumpet, I and all that are with me, then blow ye with the trumpets also on every side of the camp. And say, The sword of the Lord and of Gideon. So you picture this, he's divided them to 3 groups, and they're surrounding them. And this is the craziest battle plan since Joshua went into Jericho. I doubt that this one's taught, you know, in military strategy at West Point or any other place. But this is the plan. Now, do you think Gideon just came up with this idea on his own? Do you think that? No. This is what God shows him to do. You get a pitcher in one hand, you got a trumpet in the other, and you're going to blow with this trumpet, and then you're going to shout the sword of the Lord and get in, and you're going to smash that pitcher. That's what you're going to do. Everybody do it. As soon as we do it, everybody else do it. So Gideon, verse 19, and the 100 men that were with him came unto the outside of the camp in the beginning of the middle watch. Beginning of the middle watch. This is the middle of the night. Okay, and that helps to explain the reaction of the Midianites. It's the middle of the night. Everybody's sleeping. And they had but newly set the watch, and they blew the trumpets, and brake the pitchers that were in their hands. And the 3 companies blew the trumpets, and brake the pitchers, and held the lamps in their left hands, and the trumpets in their right hands to blow withal. And they cried, The sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And they stood every man in his place round about all the camp, and all the host ran and cried and fled. That's all that Gideon and the 300 guys have to do in this situation is blow a trumpet,
shout the sword of the Lord in Gideon and break this pitcher, and these guys are going to do the rest to themselves.
Verse 22. And the 300 blew the trumpets, and the Lord set every man's sword against his fellow, even throughout all the host. And the host fled to Bethshittah in Zerath, and to the border of Abam-Meholah, and to Tabbath. And the men of Israel gathered themselves together out of Naphtali, and out of Asher, and out of Manasseh, and pursued after the Midianites. And Gideon sent messengers throughout all the mountain of Ephraim, saying, Come down against the Midianites, and take before them the waters unto this place and that. So he goes on.
So when they do this, break the pitcher, shout, blow the trumpet, these guys, they jump up and they're panicked. They are so confused and so panicked. They believe that they are being overcome by a huge force, and they just start swinging their swords. They don't know who's next to them. They don't know friend or foe. All they know is if anybody's close enough to me, I'm going to kill them. I'm not going to take a chance that it's the enemy. And they just kill each other. And only out of this whole big group, 135,000, it goes on to talk about it, only 15,000 get out of that camp. Only 15,000 get out of that camp.
And then they pursue them. In Judges 8, we won't read it, but it says that the 300 men that were with them were faint, yet pursuing. And they came upon those 15,000, and they finish off the job against those 15,000. They still have to do fighting, but now it's cut down to at least a smaller group. Still 300 against 15,000. And yet, and tired as they are, I guess it took a lot to break that pitcher and make that commotion. They still beat them. And then they want to take Gideon and they want to make him the ruler. After that, these same people that, some were ready to kill him. Verse 22 of chapter 8 says, Then the men of Israel said unto Gideon, Rule thou over us, both thou and thy son, and thy son's sons also. You, your kid, your grandkids, you be our rulers from this point on. For thou hast delivered us from the hand of Midian. And Gideon said unto them, I will not rule over you, neither shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you.
Gideon knew who was responsible for winning that fight. He knew it wasn't him. He knew it wasn't his strength, his power, and he knew that going forward, he wasn't the one that was going to be able to rule these guys, lead them, help them to cast off the enemy. It was going to be God, and he was going to walk with God. And he judged Israel for the rest of his life, and so long as he judged them, like the other judges, they followed after God. And sadly, when he was gone, they went the other way again. But Gideon starts off at a place in his life where he thinks God's not with him, that God's given up on them. But God never gives up on people. He never gives up on his people. He didn't with Israel, and he certainly will never give up on us. We just have to know it's God who's fighting with us and for us, and then we'll always win the battle.